Now, if you're a fan of college basketball, you're going to love this video because we're talking about the KPI bracket. Yes, it is March Madness, so we're going to be using a March Madness concept. Now, one of the things that people love about March Madness is that it is a very competitive time of college basketball. There is a lot of excitement because you get to see the best teams in the country go head to head. The competition is high. There's a lot of games, and we're trying to see who will make it down to the Final Four and eventually into the championship and be crowned the king or the queen of the year because their team won it all. Now, I want to take this from a perspective of looking at a law firm, because when you're managing a law firm, there are a lot of different factors that you have to keep in mind, and there are a lot of different things to consider. And one of the best ways to run a law firm is to use your KPIs to help you make decisions and to help you understand what is happening in the business. So what we did is we took about 60 plus different KPIs and we said, what if we put it all on a bracket to boil it down to see, hey, who's going to make it to the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, the Final Four? And what we did is we put it all on a bracket to kind of rank it to say, what KPIs for a law firm do we think are the most important? And why do we think those are the most important? Now, we're going to just really boil it down and go into the Final Four because, like I said, I'm not going to go through all 60 plus of them, but we're going to cover the Final Four. Now, I do want you to understand, just because these are the Final Four KPIs that we pick, that doesn't mean that other KPIs are not important. I think that there are a lot of different KPIs that may be more applicable than others, depending on where you are in the life cycle of your business and what your objectives, what your goals are. So what we did is we said, hey, if we're looking in general across all the law firms that we usually talk to, because we provide bookkeeping, CFO services for hundreds of law firms that we've worked with, from consulting to ongoing services. And we said, hey, out of all of the law firms, if we had to really boil it down to say which KPIs would make it into the Final Four, what would those KPIs be? And I am happy to share with you the 4 KPIs that we narrowed it down to are average case value, employee ROI, cash on hand, and average revenue. Now, I'm going to break it down for each of those and tell you like why we picked, those 4 to be the Final Four of the law firm KPIs. Let's start with the top. The first one I want to talk about is the average case value. The reason why we thought average case value was a very important one is because when you're looking at your law firm and you're trying to manage, all right, how do we manage our profitability? Like what's happening in the firm? And, are we spending our time on the right things? Well, one of the things that I noticed with a lot of law firms is that they were telling me that, hey, we have enough casework, but we are constantly busy and we still seem to be running into cash problems. And usually the remedy that I find for that is let's dig in and let's understand your case value, because you might have enough cases coming in. You might be constantly busy, but if you are spending most of your time on the lowest value cases, that's probably why you're running into cash flow problems. So when a law firm is trying to manage their firm, I tell them, you want to understand what is the average value of the cases you are bringing in, because your marketing may be doing a great job bringing clients in. But if you're bringing in the lowest value cases, what's going to happen is you're either going to be working nonstop to try to keep up with or try to beat the cash flow problem, or you're going to be working really hard and then feeling like you're not really making progress because you're going to constantly have cash problems. So you want to make sure that you're watching your average case value to make sure you're working on the right types of cases. Now, that doesn't mean you can't work on lower case value work. That doesn't mean you can't do pro bono work, but you do want to watch that mix, because if you start doing too much of the lower case value or too much pro bono work, it's going to create problems in other areas of your firm. Now, the next one I want to talk about is your employee ROI. Now, the employee ROI is actually a combination of a couple of things, because what we're trying to understand with ROI is the return on investment. So we're looking at this and we're saying, how much money are you paying your staff? And then we want to ask ourselves is, how much revenue is that staff actually creating? So let's say, for example, if your payroll was, let's say, $100,000 for all of your staff and your revenue was $300,000, what that means is your staff is producing 3 times what they actually cost. So your employee ROI would be a 3x. And so I always tell people is when you're trying to run a law firm, a good baseline, and like I said, this is just a baseline, is to aim for a 3x multiple. What you want to do is look at your legal staff and ask yourself, hey, is our legal staff producing at least 3 times what they cost the firm? Because if they're producing 3 times what they cost the firm, some very quick math is a third goes to covering, their payroll and all that comes with payroll. Another third covers overhead expenses, and then another third will cover kind of other administrative taxes and profit for the partners in the firm. And so if you look at it that way, it makes sense why if your staff is producing at least 3 times what they cost, typically you're going to be in a situation where your firm is in a good, healthy financial position to either invest in the future or to do some extra things that can really help the firm stay healthy. Now, the third one that made it into the Final Four is your average revenue. Now, when it comes down to your average revenue, the way I tend to look at this is I like to break it down on a weekly basis. And the reason why I like to break it down on a weekly basis is because it helps me understand how much money are we earning on a weekly basis. Because if I understand how much money we're earning on a weekly basis, it's really just a math problem to figure out, okay, on average, we earn this much per month. Now, the reason why I say weekly is better is because when you look at your expenses, a lot of times your expenses are not coming out on a monthly basis. Your expenses usually are coming out whatever day those expenses are due. So you constantly have cash going out the door. Every week of the month, cash is continually going out the door. And so what I want to understand is, do we have enough cash coming in on a weekly basis to really cover all of these expenses that we have going out the door? Because I've seen where a lot of firms may run into some cash flow issues where, let's say they have expenses that their total expenses for the month is, let's say if it's $100,000, just for simple math. And let's say if their revenue for the month is $120,000. Well, if you're looking at it a monthly basis, that sounds fine. But when you break it down to a weekly basis, what you realize is this firm is waiting until the third week of the month to send out invoices, which means that $120,000 isn't coming in until week 3 and week 4. Well, in week 1 and week 2, you still got bills to pay. You still got payroll to go out. So if you're waiting until the end of the month to actually get money to come in the door, what that tells me is you're probably going to run into some financial issues, in which when you run into financial issues, they eventually become operational problems. And then they eventually become customer problems, meaning they're going to impact your ability to deliver legal services to your customer. So I always say you want to look at your average revenue on a weekly basis. Like, how much are you earning on a weekly basis? Plus, if you're looking at it on a weekly basis, let's say you have 1 week that's off. Well, if you're looking at it on a weekly basis, it gives you enough time to really make some corrections and some changes. So, like, hey, if I need to go talk to my associates or my paralegals about getting their billable work up, maybe we had a down week, we need to really make up for it. Well, if you wait until the end of the month to look at your revenue number, it's too late for you to do anything about it. But if you're looking at it on a weekly basis, it allows you to understand where are we, what's going on, and gives you time to make some adjustments if necessary. Now, the last one that I believe made it into the Final Four is cash on hand. We really need to understand cash on hand because at the end of the day, no matter what type of business you are running, your cash is, I would say, the blood to your business. I mean, it is the lifeblood to your business. I would say without cash, your business is bankrupt. If you run out of cash, that means you probably won't be able to operate your business, or you're going to have to do some desperate things like go out and take out some very expensive working capital loans, or the partners are going to have to put in more money, or you're going to have to max out on credit cards. And to be honest with you, eventually, line of credits, working capital loans or any type of business loans or credit cards, eventually you will reach a limit on those. So what you want to make sure is that, hey, do we have sufficient cash on hand to really operate our business? Because one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to have an unnecessary disruption because no one was really looking at the cash on hand. And here's a really good tip for you if you're looking at your cash on hand is if you also understand what your weekly expenses are, you can actually take your cash on hand, divide it by your average weekly expenses. And what that'll tell you is how many weeks could you survive before you have a big problem. Let's, use some round numbers. Let's say, for example, if you have about $20,000 in the bank right now as your operating cash. And then let's look at it and let's say if your average expenses on a weekly basis is $5,000. Well, if you have $20,000 in the bank, your average expenses are $5,000. What that tells me is you probably have 4 weeks worth of cash on hand, which means that if something happened for 4 weeks, then that means you're probably going to be in serious trouble. So it gives me an idea on what type of buffer and how soon we need to make sure we're getting billing out to make sure we're getting more money coming in. Because if you run out of cash, you're going to drastically disrupt and hurt your business. And eventually you're going to hurt the clients that you support. Because if you don't have money to operate your business and you don't have money to pay your staff, guess what? That staff is not going to be able to effectively support the clients that you care so much about and the clients and the cases where they are depending on you to be able to help them with their legal matter. So there you have it, my final four when it comes down to the law firm KPI bracket. That is the average case value, the employee ROI, the average revenue, and the cash on hand. And maybe we'll do some more videos where we expand it out and we go through even more of the KPIs and show you the full bracket of how we went round by round to get down to the final four for law firm KPIs. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Law Firm and Finance Show, where we give you great content that helps you build a more successful law firm. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on all platforms and follow us for more content.